From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our Throwback episode. In our Throwback episodes, we are reintroducing you to some of our most popular episodes. This is great for new listeners who want to learn more about the work we've done in the past, and it's a great refresher if you've been a listener for a long time. Enjoy. Alicia, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Another teammate on the show. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, Alicia Shaw. I'm an attorney with Carlisle, Patchen and Murphy, and I do our employment law. We usually represent employers, so I'm typically on the management side, and I do a lot of HR consulting, a lot of counseling for our employers, and a lot of compliance work in terms of what do I do when this happens, and what happens, what do I need to do if someone makes a request for an accommodation. Just a lot of very basic HR counseling and consulting, and it's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. And so everybody, in case you weren't up to date, so I'm also an attorney at Carlisle, Patchen and Murphy because I am a stereotypical Caribbean American with multiple jobs. So if you need legal representation in Ohio, we have you, and you could work with Alicia. And so we are excited today because we're talking about awkward conversations. And so before we get into the how-tos, why is it so important for us to have these conversations and have them well?
So from my perspective, as I said, being on the employer side of things, but even if you're representing an employee, or even if you are the employee or you are the employer, I mean, there are things that happen at work that you just have to address. And sometimes they involve, personal feelings. Sometimes they involve awkward situations. Sometimes they involve things that might, broach inappropriate behavior. And so you can't just not say anything. So I think it's very important, especially for an employer, to know, hey, these are the things to keep in mind when I have to go to my employee and either, perhaps issue discipline, but more importantly, create a work environment that is beneficial to not only my company, but also to my employees. And so a lot of times I'm in a position where I'm counseling someone who is who's had an issue come up that they need to address with an employee, and they don't know how to do it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And one of the things I always say is that sometimes the war chooses you. We don't have the option sometimes. We just have to do what we need to do.
Absolutely. And I think every person who started a business doesn't, they know what they're doing for their business, but becoming an employer is so different. And a lot of people tell me, I never thought I'd have to have this discussion.
Right.
But you do. So.
Exactly. Well, fantastic. Well, audience, the three things that we're going to talk about on this topic are, first, the importance of maintaining your professionalism and focus, and more specifically, how to do that, because it's easy to say it, much harder to do it. The second thing is the importance of practice, and more specifically, how to practice before the conversation. And lastly, the importance of a follow-up check-in in order to build the relationship and how to do that too. But before we get into that, again, we have a story. So we're going to work from a case study, one that Alicia had worked on specifically, obviously with some key factors changed for anonymity. And so, Alicia, how about you get us started with that story?
Yes. So I had a call from a very, very nice business owner who is in an industry that is very I would say it's very blue collar. It's not a services. It's in kind of like a manufacturing. So you're dealing with a lot of men, and this particular client called and said, "Hey, we have someone who is sending naked pictures of himself to coworkers, and what do I do?" So, starting with, the most awkward of situations, first of all, you have the competing issues of, well, this is a trusted employee, and this is not something that I would ever expect I would have to deal with. And secondly, of course, it has to be dealt with. And you have to have that conversation. So how do you have it?
So when we're actually having the conversation, maintaining professionalism and focus, what should we keep in mind here?
Well, what I always tell a client in this situation, and not even this particular situation, but something less extreme, you need to make sure that you have a clear idea of what you want to come out of the conversation. So going into it, is it something where I just need to address something small? Is it something where there's going to be a termination at the end of the conversation? As in, the situation we discussed where you have someone who's acted so egregiously that you're going to have to terminate them, or at a minimum, there's going to have to be some significant discipline. So you have to go in mind, or you have to start with what's the end goal. And the end goal, of course, as the employer is usually, you can control that to a certain extent. But getting there, I think a lot of people are scared that they're going to say something wrong. They don't want to get themselves as the employer in trouble. But they also, don't really want to talk about things that are of a sensitive nature, especially in the situation where there might be something sexual going on between employees. That's always kind of an embarrassing thing to have to discuss with someone. So I always say, don't, take your emotions out of it. Sit someone down, start the conversation, get right to the point. Don't allow yourself to be dragged into, the emotion of the situation. If the employee or the other person is getting upset or is argumentative, you know what you're there to do, and it has to be done. And, you can give a reason, as long as it's a truthful reason, and stick to that, and really say, I understand you're upset. But the decision has been made, or you need to stop doing X, Y, and Z. But I always caution people, don't dance around the subject to the point where the person you're talking to doesn't realize that they've been terminated, or or doesn't realize that what they did was inappropriate.
Yeah. And so one of the key points that you mentioned there was making sure you control your emotions and keep everybody focused so their emotions don't get problematic for the conversation. And again, that makes sense, but how do we do it? That's the hardest part. So what advice do you have for the listeners there?
I usually advise that you have a phrase that you can come back to. And it depends on what the end result of the conversation is. For example, if you are going to have to terminate the individual's employment because of something that's happened, the decision has been made. Don't apologize. The decision has been made. I understand you're upset. And then quickly move into, here are your benefits that are available to you after the termination. If it's something that is not, if it's something that you just want an employee to stop doing at the workplace, again, I would have a phrase that you've practiced, that you're comfortable with, that shows that you're in control of the situation. And really, if the person gets upset, do not go down that path. It's very easy to, I think a lot of people try to, avoid these difficult conversations because they don't want to deal with the aftermath. But you know what? It's unavoidable. Accept it, move forward, and keep your mind focused on what you're there to do, and get the job done.
Absolutely. And Alicia, it is always refreshing when I have another well-trained attorney on the show because you're reminding me of a first year writing class, like Law 1, where my writing professor always talked about the phrase that pays. There's something in a previous court decision that a judge said, and you just keep on saying that phrase over and over and over again. And essentially, that's what we're doing. And especially when it comes to having these awkward conversations and setting clear boundaries, you do not need to make the conversation interesting. There are no such thing as style points. Just say what you need to say. And if they keep on pushing back, state the same boundary, the same barrier in the exact same way.
Brace the rudders! Brace the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/marketer. Terms and conditions apply.
I agree. And there's no reason, I always tell people to avoid getting into the nitty gritty discussion. It doesn't benefit anyone usually. And typically it will end up where you could have a meeting that takes 10 minutes. Then you have an hour and a half. And I definitely have counseled clients who all of a sudden, they're in a meeting in a discipline situation and, this has been said and that's been said and this person was called in and then they had a rebuttal. And no, don't do any of that. If after your 10 minutes, if there are still issues, then you can address them later. But don't keep hashing out the same situation for hours on end.
Absolutely. And I remember in our pre-interview chat, something that you mentioned is keep it simple, keep it professional. And I feel like if we do that, it makes everything a lot easier.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, what I always fall back on when I am talking to clients is, first of all, respectful. Even if something has, even if an employee has, done something that, like I said, results in their termination, it's still a respectful conversation. And as part of that, you have to be a professional. The worst thing you can do, I think, is to engage in the dialogue of, well, you did this, and then you did that, and then you did this. And so as long as it is professional and simple and short, that's the other thing. I think you'll be in good shape.
Exactly. I tell people all the time, it's the shorter the conversation, the easier it's going to be. Again, the more you go on, the more likely it is for you to make a mistake, the more likely it is for you to get off track, and the more likely it is for somebody to see some vulnerability in what you said. Maybe you misstated a fact that wasn't perfectly stated, but is completely irrelevant to the overall outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah, so just keep it short.
Keep it, what is the famous phrase? Keep it simple, stupid. So
Exactly.
as much as you can.
For sure. And listeners, I know that especially if you're still listening, you've gotten something out of this. So make sure you leave a review and subscribe. And if you liked this episode, give Alicia a shout out. Let her know in the reviews. So I think this is perfect, a perfect opportunity for us to transition into the second point, practice. Because again, we say, okay, Alicia, this sounds good. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep it professional. I'm going to keep emotions out of it. And then we go and perform and we fall apart. So can you tell us a bit more about practice?
Well, I always, sometimes people feel better with a script. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I personally am not a script person, but I do think that it's important to lay out the key points. So, if it's better to write out what you would like to say and practice it that way, or if you can take some highlights, we know that you engaged in X behavior. This is a violation of our company policy here. And accordingly, we need to issue discipline, X, Y, and Z. Just very simple. But again, practicing it a couple of times and understand that, even though you want to project control, you can't control what the other person's going to do. So the only thing you can do is control your response. So like I said, have a phrase ready to go that you can fall back on in the event things start spiraling, so that you don't get dragged down into that discussion.
Sometimes when we practice, we also need to practice from the other person's perspective. And
Mhm.
so what I suggest people do is do 2 trial runs. The first one that you do from the other person's perspective. So you bring somebody in, like your incredible attorney, Alicia, in, and then you try to be the person who is going to be on the receiving end of the
Mhm.
awkward conversation from your perspective. It helps you to empathize. And
Mhm.
then you do a second trial run from the other side. And I've done this with some of my business clients too, because for me, I'm always saying, hey, put me in, coach. I can, I would love to negotiate this for you. But sometimes the relationship is so personal that they say, listen, the relationship is not ending. And so if I bring in my lawyer to have this conversation, then it is going to cause some issues down the road. So I want to handle it myself. And so sometimes for me as the lawyer, I go through it with them too.
Absolutely. And in an employment situation, I sometimes do have clients who want me to do the termination. And that's never, that could create issues down the line that the client might not intend in the event, something goes wrong and there's litigation, and all of a sudden your lawyer is your witness. And so I don't ever participate in that, but I am happy to talk through all of these scenarios and, well, what happens if they say this? And what happens if they say that? Because sometimes, depending on the person, they feel so much better having at least gone through all the possibilities in their head, and can practice the response. But ultimately, it's usually the business owner's responsibility, and it just comes with the territory when you have employees. Someday you're going to have an awkward conversation.
Absolutely. And I really like the point that you said about what if they say this? And that's really something I think that people miss, because I hear people, what they would say is, man, I hope they don't say this, or I hope they don't ask this question. And then they go into the conversation and the person does that exact thing that they're fearing, and they still have no response. And so I think we have to think about the worst possible scenario and then saying, okay, if this were to happen, then I would say what? You want to have that prepared.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that goes to, being able to control the conversation as much as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I love it. And listeners, I know you've heard this before. Make sure you check out the negotiation guides. So if you go to AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/guide, you can get free guides that help you to prepare for these difficult conversations. Again, the more you prepare, the more you practice, the better you will be. And let's wrap this up with the last point, doing the follow-up check-in. And for most people, they say, well, whew, I already had this awkward conversation.
That's fine.
Glad that's over. I'm never going back to that. But you are saying we need to. So tell us more about that.
So in the event that it's something that's not so egregious, this employee or whatever it is, this you want them to stay on, and they are planning to, and we're going to move forward in this relationship. It's good to build rapport. I don't advise, if it's something that that you do need to check in on. Let's say, hey, for example, if you've had an employee that's complained of being harassed by a coworker, of course, that's something you need to check in on. But something that is less serious, it's not something you have to belabor. The point's been made. You reached out to the employee. You made a note in the personnel file. So if you ever have to go back and say, you know what, you haven't improved on this or that, or I noticed that you're doing this again. Then you can go back to your records and say, hey, we had this conversation on, December 1st of 2020. And we're, we're right back where we were. And so you'll be ready next time in case you have to do the unfortunate, further discipline or a termination. But absent that, move on. It's only going to be more awkward if you make it awkward. So, moving on, checking in. Hey, how are you doing today? Don't avoid the person just because of that conversation, because that will make potentially a good employee want to leave if they feel uncomfortable after, you've had to have that conversation. So the goal is, it's always to make a more respectful and more professional work environment. And so I think if that's the goal and that's how you behave and you're collegial about it and respectful, others will follow suit.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And Alicia, I know we've all been in these types of scenarios, these circumstances where there's a person where we have an awkward relationship and we have to go past their office or whatever it happens to be. And you're thinking about the awkwardness, they're thinking about the awkwardness, and we just make eye contact, quickly avert, and then move on. It's so hard. It's a natural human thing, but we really have to lean into it. And I really like what you said, because we're not dwelling on it. We're not saying, hey, Alicia, you remember that awkward thing? I just wanted to check in to make sure you're okay still. No, let's just be humans together again. I can check in on you, see how you're doing. And then we're slowly making really simple and safe deposits in the relationship bank account. And then we can get the relationship back to where we want it to be.
Absolutely. I think 9 times out of 10, everybody on both sides just wants to do what's best. And so sometimes, most of the time, the person who you have to have the awkward conversation with isn't necessarily aware that what they're doing is either offensive to someone else or, something that might be problematic. So typically, just advising them of that is going to take care of the situation. And so you don't want to make a situation worse by harping on it, so to speak. But then there are the situations that don't get better, and you have to revisit the issue. And that's, of course, when you go back to step 1.
And so any ideas or kind of simple rules that we can follow when it comes to problems that persist and how to have that termination conversation? Because the way we work through it, we said, okay, we had the awkward conversation. Now we're rebuilding the relationship. Let's say it doesn't continue. What are some things that we need to keep in mind for ending the relationship?
So it's really interesting. I have a lot of clients who are afraid to give someone a reason for their termination. I think they're just scared to say the wrong thing. And I always tell clients that, you know what, I think on the receiving end, if it's a surprise to that individual, or maybe it's not a surprise, maybe this is a follow-up that you've had before, they should know the reason. Even if it's something simple like a reduction in force, or, the company this year, especially the company is not doing well and we have to reorganize, give them something. Now, saying that, I don't recommend, again, keep it short, keep it simple. The decision's been made. If it's something based on a past discipline issue, definitely I would reference that past, time that you talked about this situation before and the fact that it's not gotten any better. But at least the person is left with something, as opposed to, I have no idea why I was terminated. I think most of the litigation that comes in employment, decisions when there's a termination, it's because the individual who was terminated just out of the blue, and I was given no reason. And from the employer's perspective, it's hard because you're afraid to say the wrong thing. But as long as what you're saying is truthful, I don't think that there's a problem to state a short and simple reason for the termination.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And I think, yes, and I think it just provides some closure.
Absolutely. And humans have this need to know. We're always asking why, especially when something bad happens, we're always asking why. And so again, to your point, that helps to give them that closure. Yeah. And one of the things that we said before the interview that I thought was really interesting was your prediction on what could happen next year when people start to hopefully get back to the office. So again, sell the audience on why this is so important right now.
So it's interesting. As an employment attorney, you do get a lot of very different kinds of stories. And what I will say is COVID has kept everyone apart, and you can't go out with your coworkers. Nobody's having Christmas parties. There's a whole list of things that have been canceled. And what I was saying before we got on the podcast was, in 2021, at some point, there's going to be a reopening and everyone's going to be unleashed. And I just have a feeling that, it gets very tempting for people to, especially if there's alcohol around, to do something that they may later regret. And that's when, as an employer, you just really have to be careful about, even when you're planning those back to work celebrations or, whatever it may be mindful of the fact that people have foregone these kinds of events for so long that you really want to be able to safely celebrate and not have to have these conversations after a holiday party. And I've had many clients that have had to. So yes, and if you're in that situation, watch our interview.
Well, Alicia, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so much fun. And listeners, hey, remember, I'm a business owner too. And when I have legal needs, guess who drafted my contracts and handled all of my employment work? Alicia, because good lawyers hire good lawyers to represent them. So not only am I a part of CPM, Carlisle, Patchen and Murphy, as a business lawyer, but I am also a happy client as well. So reach out to Alicia if you have any questions or legal needs. And Alicia, any parting words for our audience before you go?
My approach to my law practice is I'm happy to talk through the difficult moments with you because, every business owner has them. And when you have employees, it can magnify certain issues. And it's really been a fun practice, but most important, I'm there to help my client.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Alicia. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Congratulations, you've just joined an elite club. By listening to a full episode, you're now officially on the Negotiate Anything team. So welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episodes of the show. The best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep getting better. Your relationships will improve, your career will soar, and you'll have the confidence you need to get the most out of these crucial conversations. Again, thank you for joining the team. We're excited to have you, and I will see you in the next episode. I'll catch you later.